Good evening and welcome to The Journey Home. I'm Marcus Grodi, your host for this program. EWTN every week gives me this great privilege to come into your homes to bring with me a guest who, by the movement of the Holy Spirit, their mind and heart was open to the beauty of the church. And often it's a trajectory that they didn't anticipate or even want. And sometimes that's the case. It may be true with our guest tonight. We'll find out in a moment. Our guest is Trevor Lipscomb, former Agnostic and Nominal Anglican. That's the way of describing his background. He's now the director of the Catholic University Association Press. And Trevor, it is a great privilege to invite you to the program.
Thanks for having me, Marcus.
I didn't realize this before you arrived, that of your position with Catholic University Press, and you're a hero then, in my mind, from the standpoint that one of the things that Catholic University Press is known for is the series of early church fathers,
yes.
Which those that have watched the Journey Home program know how important the witness of the early fathers is to helping people come back to the church. So thank you for doing it.
Oh, you're welcome. We're very proud of the series. It's probably the thing that the Catholic University of America Press is most known for. And it helps us really take part in the new evangelization. When we have a feast day of a saint or father of the church, we're going to run a little blurb from something that they've written, and hopefully that will touch hearts and minds for all those who read it.
Yeah, another reason then that I'm grateful for your publication, especially of Augustine, is that our separated brethren, Luther and Calvin, thought Augustine was on their side. But by having the readers go back and read the fullness of Augustine, they can see that, well, yeah, you can pick and choose what you want out of an author to make him say what you want him to say.
Absolutely.
But he was pretty fully Catholic.
Well, the Holy Father is a very keen devotee of Augustine's writings, so he must be fairly Catholic, if nothing else.
Well, it's good to have you on the program. Let me get out of the way, and what I do for the guests is invite you to take us back and give us a summary of your early journey.
My early journey is a little bit different. I was born in southeast London, actually literally overlooking the River Thames.
In the Suffolk area?
Actually, no, it's right in the heart of London.
Okay.
If you saw the Olympics, the equestrian event where they're jumping over the fences, actually it was right in Greenwich, where I was born.
Okay.
But it was an interesting story early on. My mum and dad, my father had trouble with alcohol. My mum had trouble with depression. And so they got married probably too young. They had my brother, and then they split up and actually tried a reconciliation, and 9 months after reconciliation I arrived. But unfortunately the marriage didn't survive. So my early years were spent, it was my mum, my brother and I growing up in, I suppose you would call them the projects, but public housing in southeast London. And when I was 4, my mum died, which was rather tough. And actually while she was in the hospital, my brother and I were staying at the local vicar's place, the Anglican vicar. She'd been going to the church there. And so we were with him, and he called my brother, who was 7, aside and said, your mother's dead, go tell your brother. So that was tough for him. I don't remember much about being young, but I can tell you exactly what I was doing when he told me. So that was...
Were you automatically Anglican?
Yes. By default, everyone in England is Anglican unless you say, no, I'm not. So I was baptized Anglican. And my Anglican godparents, actually, my aunt and uncle, adopted me, but for various reasons, my brother went to live with Dad, and I grew up with my aunt and uncle, who became my mum and dad, and who were my godparents. But they did not darken the doorstep of a church, actually, from the time I knew them until the day my wife and I got married. Which is odd, because I can say that my parents actually attended Catholic Mass more in their life than they ever did an Anglican Mass, because they never went when I was a child.
So you being brought up then, my guess is, had no catechetical influence or encouragement or even God as a part of your thinking?
Not really. In in Britain there's this lovely thing on Sundays. It's 6 till 7, used to be, might even call it a holy hour. There has to be religious programming on every station. It used to be back when I was a kid. So there were songs of praise. And that was about as close to religion as I, or the vast majority of Brits, I think, get. You watch songs of praise and they go to a local parish and they hear from people who are faithful parishioners who want to hear a particular song sung. So that was about it. I was in the Boy Scouts for a while, and you got extra points if you went to church parade on Sundays, and it was great because you could carry the flag in and things like that. So those are the few times that I ever really went to church was just as a function of being in the Boy Scouts. So it was. My parents were not particularly in favour of religion. Really, sort of the big event in my life was when I was 13 and discovered that my mum had committed suicide. Which was rough when you're 13. It's rough at any age, I assume. But then it sort of explains some things.
It was her depression?
It was her depression, yeah. My brother will tell you the story that she actually died because of sunshine. She was hoping she'd taken an overdose, and there was someone who was scheduled to visit, but the weather was so nice she did her laundry, and by the time she arrived, it was too late to save Mum, unfortunately. So it was hard news to bear. But because she'd been involved with the church, and because of some of the things that happened after her death with the local vicar and his interaction with my adoptive parents, they really weren't at home with religion at all. I have a Bible still on my shelf at home which has my birth surname written on the inside front cover, and it was a treasured thing because it's the only thing that I have. And I'm reading it at home as a little kid, and my adopted mum would walk past and go, because it's an unhappy memory for her.
Yes.
But it was a crutch for me. But anyway, so age 13, you find this out, and it's teenage years are tricky. I sort of got into my head that, people are basically bad. They're basically out for themselves. If you find anyone remotely decent in life, it's by chance. That's not the way people are. Very Manichaean, actually, talking about Augustine, but anyway. So I decided that there's no one out there who cares for the poor except the communists. So there was 13 or 14, and I sent off a letter to the Young Communist League asking for information, because by golly they cared about the poor. And I sent the letter off, and then it occurred to me, what happens if it doesn't come back in a plain brown envelope? What happens if it has Young Communist League, top left-hand corner? I've got some explaining to do here. But luckily, plain unmarked wrapper, and got out all the stuff. So I used to think of myself as Marxist because it was kind of cool and different, and come the revolution, comrade, the tanks will roll through Parliament Square and all this kind of thing. And
usually at 14, 15, you're not thinking about the long-term effect on a life of involvement with something like that. You're thinking about the now. And
it's cool and it's different. I mean, where we were living in England at the time, the way the voting system works in England, you have about 100,000 people in a given voting area, and I think we were living in Tunbridge, there's something like a 60,000 Conservative majority. So again, it was part of that being against the system kind of thing. And you learn phrases like, cringing sycophant of the bourgeoisie and petty bourgeois reptile, and it all sounds very cool. You can do the sarcastic teenager bit very well. So that's really sort of the growing up years was regarding myself as being part of the intellectual vanguard of the revolution.
Was that kind of your religion at that time, would you say? I mean the way that shaped how you looked at people then in life?
I think so. I think so. Especially, in Tunbridge, you've had Joseph Pearce on here, right? Yeah. England at that time is very much going through periods of racial tension, and I'm figuring, why can't we all get along? A lot of teenagers are either very left-wing or very right-wing at that stage, so I was at the left-wing end of things, figuring that would be an end to racism if we all became communist. So yeah, it was really the lens.
Were you and Joseph, did you know each other during that?
No.
Okay.
No. London's a big place.
Yeah, well, I understood, but I know you're friends with now. That's why I wondered.
That's right, in spite of the fact that he's a Chelsea soccer fan and I'm not. I think it's probably a mortal sin to be a Chelsea fan, but I can't speak to church teaching on that. That's really how I headed to college, as university, as somebody who thought of themselves as Marxist.
No? Okay, so you're not practicing religion at all? And
No. The only real interaction I'd had with religion is reading the occasional book. The way things work in England is that you take O-levels when you're 16. So if any Harry Potter fans out there, OWL levels that Harry takes are a pun on O-levels that you used to take when you were 16. And then you study, if you're going to go to university, 3 subjects back then at a higher level for 2 years. And I started off doing English, math, and economics for reasons I have no idea. And decided after a while that I was really a mathematician and a physicist, so I swapped to do pure math, applied math, and physics. But I wanted to keep in touch with those English sides of me. And the next thing that they were going to read was the poetry and prose of Gerard Manley Hopkins. And the poetry obviously is very religious. It's deeply moving, I think.
so it can be difficult.
Though it can be difficult, and
The reason I say that because I imagine some folk out there running to get their copy of Jeremiah Hopkins, and it's going to be tough if you're not a lover of poetry.
yeah, he has days when he's far more easy to understand than others. The Wreck of the Deutschland is his great poem. I think it's an act of will to get through it. Bless him. And actually, years later, I'd end up being in the very parish where he used to be a parish priest. But in the back, they have letters that he wrote to his family when he converted. And I don't know whether a seed was sown at that stage, but clearly he gets rejected by his family to a certain extent. And one of the key phrases that would come back to, not to haunt me, but would go through my mind later on, was when he's saying to his father, here we are talking about which is the Church of Christ. And it's going to take more than a lifetime of study. But the true faith has to be something that is going to appeal to the rich and to the poor, to the intelligent, to the not so intelligent, and it's got to have authenticity. It should be able to trace its roots back to Jesus. And of course he's writing this after the main thrust of the Oxford movement. John Henry Newman is very much concerned about trying to establish in his Protestant days apostolic succession of the Anglican Church.
Interesting. So you're leaning towards math and physics, not English, which is a little bit different than where you ended up here a couple years later. But
that's right.
It's interesting that then could easily be, though it wasn't a personal decision, but it's a movement away from having to deal with religious books, religious issues. You can put your blinders on and do science and math.
That's right. I mean, you don't find too many people practicing religion who end up being physicists, so it seems. But yes, it was an interesting time of life. Part of the thing about being a pseudo-Marxist or lapsed Marxist is you have to address things like armed revolution, which I was never quite comfortable with. I'm more keen on writing stiffly worded letters to the newspapers than manning the barricades. And there's that phrase from Jean-Paul Sartre about if you want to make an omelette, you've got to crack some eggs, and it's a lovely one-liner, but we're talking about the death of 27 million people in the gulags. And also I found it interesting, if you look back at one of the early meetings of the Communists, the First International, they're actually pro-life, oddly enough. You want to have a revolution, revolutions only take place when the poor are starving. So if you contracept, if you abort, you're artificially restricting the population. So very early on, you actually see, pro-life is probably too strong a way to put it, right. But the idea that this is not really what should be going on.
I may be wrong on this, but the one thing that always sticks out to me when I think of Marxist ideas, it's class warfare, us versus them. dividing the world into two groups, the haves and the have-nots, and you get this kind of underlying hermeneutic behind everything. Us versus them, the poor versus the rich. So you have the breakdown in that. So you could easily see that they could argue that abortion is the haves controlling the population of the have-nots.
Yep.
So you could see a Marxist would say that it's wrong with that because of that control, which was what the Nazi doctors were also doing.
Yep, absolutely.
But this is where you were.
That's right, yeah. And so there I am. I guess I'm feeling, is this Marxism thing really for me? Am I really in favour of armed revolt and all this? No, I'm not. And I finished my undergraduate degree and then headed off to do a PhD at Oxford. A lovely place, may I say. And pretty much living the life of a doctoral student. And then one sunny day, actually it was a pretty cold and cloudy, rainy day, it was mid-November, I played rugby at college. And
You can still move and everything?
Well,
whenever I envision rugby guys, it's like, because you destroy yourself.
Stay tuned. So I'm riding my bike down the Iffley Road in Oxford, and I can tell you exactly where I was. There's Greyfriars, which is the Franciscan Hall of Residence, right there with the church, and next to it is the Iffley Road track where Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile record. And I have something goes through my head, and I'm going to break something today. Now, I played rugby for years, and I got kicked in the eye once and pulled a muscle once, and that was it. And I remember thinking on the bike, well, I've had a good run, an arm or a leg, it'll heal. And so within about an hour later, I'm laying on the ground, my back's broken.
Whoa.
Yeah, and the ambulance, they actually drove the ambulance down onto the rugby pitch. The groundskeeper at Magdalen was a lovely man, but it was deeply protective of his surface of the playing pitch. And he was livid. He sees a car coming down onto the pitch. Like, what on earth has happened? It's Trevor. Oh, yeah, okay. Well, it's Trevor. Okay, that's okay. But they took me off to hospital, and I'd broken my neck, and so I was strapped up for about 9 months in devices that look rather like the things that Edmund Campion was clamped into in the Tower of London. But that was a life-changing moment for me, really. I'm there in hospital, and folks are coming to see me and exuding sympathy and concern and all that. And it got the wheels turning. Like, okay, why, if I believe that people are basically nasty and out for what they can get, why are they coming here to show sympathy, concern, love? And really suddenly realized that they are a reflection of the love that God has for us. That there's a God, he expresses love through human beings. There's a God, and he loves me. And there's a God, and his son is Jesus Christ. Okay. Which was actually a relief, because when you're laying flat in a hospital ward like that, and all you can do is count the spots on the ceiling, it gives you something a little bit more interesting to think about.
Where'd that come from? Did it come? Was it coming out of what someone had taught you earlier in life, or what you had picked up along the way in your culture? Do you think, or
divine providence, Marcus?
Okay, I'm wondering. No, I'm going there, but I'm wondering.
Yeah, I don't know. I really don't know. Maybe it's something in Hopkins' deeply religious poetry that struck a chord. Maybe it was the surreptitious Bible reading when I was very young. I don't know. But
the seeds somehow were there under all the compost.
That's right. And it was a momentary thing. It was just suddenly this idea flashed into my mind, and thanks be to God that thought has never left me since.
So 9 months on your back. I mean, how this progressed? You had this awakening. Was it a progressive, or was there ups and downs even during those 9 months?
It was tough, because when you're on an emotional roller coaster anyway. I mean, and simply I ended up having to go home from college because you couldn't really fend for yourself. I can't even cut my hair, can't shave, can't even wash easily. So I went home, and you have good days and you have bad days. There are days when you can think about God, and there are days that you can't. And some of the days when you think about God, you wonder why my neck is broken and what's going to happen. And the doc told me, he said, you have to have informed consent for this operation. And I said, well, okay, right, what's that? He said, well, with the operation, you may be paralyzed from the neck down. Without the operation, you will be paralyzed from the neck down. Do you want the operation? So there was that added stress of how does this end up in the long run. And I woke up one morning, actually, and I couldn't feel these two fingers here. And like, oh my goodness, this is not looking good. Does this progress? And the surgeon said, if you're going to lose the feeling in two fingers, we're not going back in there. It's too dangerous. But it's Oxford, right? So he turns around and says, well, absolutely fascinating. The nerves that run down there actually will go by the back of the neck, and they have a sort of outlet to the stomach. So in fact, what they used to do in Roman days was to put a cold compress behind their neck here so that their stomachs would expand so they could eat whatever their guest had in front. I'm sorry, I can't feel these two fingers. It's lovely that you know all this stuff about ancient Rome, so numb fingers and feeling hungry is a consequence of the nerve being trapped. But now I'm fine. But it was easy to believe that God existed. It was very easy to believe that Jesus is his son. The big problem is which church. And my roommate at the time was, his father was a rector of the Anglican seminary up in Durham in England. And my roommate gave me this wonderful advice. He said, you've gone through all this, you've discovered God, you've discovered Jesus. Really, you're sort of Anglican, so why don't you just start attending Anglican services? Because it's a really broad church. If you find yourself drawn to the evangelical charismatic end of things, you can go to that church. If you find yourself drawn to liturgy, you can go to the higher end Anglo-Catholic church. It's a broad church. Yeah. And typical of brilliant advice, I completely and utterly ignored him and did what I was going to do anyway. But there was a problem, and the problem is that exactly Gerard Manley Hopkins' issue, which is the Church of Christ, and it's got to be something that can trace its roots back to the very earliest days, and the Catholic Church, it seemed to me, could do that. The Anglican Church, it's founded so that Henry VIII could get a divorce. And I don't think anyone's going to claim that Henry VIII was a particularly holy person.
Were you aware of that when you were going through that specific period?
Very much so.
Okay.
Very much so. I can't be Anglican. And again, going back to the issue with my mum, your brother's dead, go tell your mother's dead, go tell your brother. It tends to colour one's attitude. Yeah. And there were intellectual things as well going on at the time. God writes straight with crooked lines. You have, in the Catholic Church at that time, liberation theology, which for someone who thinks of himself as being Marxist, there you have some theologians who are trying to work out what is the Church's response to the poor. On the other hand, Anglican theology at the time is more... I should know the name of the actual movement, but you have people like Don Cupid who are looking at foundational issues. So do they need to believe in the virgin birth, for example? Do we need to believe in a physical resurrection? Well, as someone who's just realized that this is true, that the Bible is true, hearing that we don't need to worry about all that doesn't look like a good home for me. Having worried about the poor, having thought about injustice, racism and things like that, here you have the Catholic theologians, or a subset of Catholic theologians at that time, worrying about exactly that issue. It seemed to me that the Catholic Church was more of a home. So I figured I should find out more about it. It was also strange that the few friends I had who went to church on the weekends were Catholic. I think I had 5 people I knew who went to church. 1 was Protestant, the other 4 were practicing Catholics. So,
we've often heard that there's, even though the number of Catholics in England of course, the number's a lot smaller than the number of Anglicans. But the rumor is that yet there are more Catholics that go to church than Anglicans.
Absolutely. I believe the latest figures are that more Muslims go to the mosque on the weekend, but I think Catholics still have Protestants beat in terms of church attendance.
So you're being drawn to the Catholic Church because you got a couple friends that go to...
For many reasons, yeah. So I figured I should find out more. So I had this great Thursday evening or something, and I thought I've got to do something about this. So I got on my bike, and I'm halfway.
So you've come through the surgery. Everything was fine, and you're...
Everything's fine.
Okay.
Yeah. Famously, I get the neck brace off. I can now play cricket. My first game back playing cricket, I managed to break my thumb. So it was a crazy time. So I was riding my bike down the Iffley Road, and there I am outside Greyfriars, and I figured I will go in there. Because I'm doing this immense favour of becoming Catholic, so of course they're going to see me. So I go into the church and sit down there, and eventually a friar comes over to me, and he said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Well, I'm thinking about becoming Catholic." And he said, "Well, we're closing up the church, so could you come back on Tuesday?" Okay. So I went...
It sounds like so far you've not had a real good experience with either an Anglican clergyman or a Catholic priest.
No. But I was back on Tuesday, and then he said, "You're at the university, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." "Well, sorry, we can't help you. You've got to go to the Catholic chaplaincy." No, okay. So a little while passes, a few days, and then finally I decide I'll go to the Catholic chaplaincy. So walk into the Catholic chaplaincy, bump into Father Rod, who was the Catholic chaplain then. I mean, literally bumped into him. And I said, "Hey, I want to become Catholic." He said, "Oh, excellent. What's your name? Do come back for the lectures." So that was finally how I managed to connect with someone who was perhaps interested in having me come into the church.
Why don't we take a break there, Trevor? Because I'd like to ask you, like, what were some of the first books you read, some of the first people that influenced to help you understand? Because at the time, there's as you said, there's liberation theology going on. So did you find the real church, or did you find the different opinions of what the Catholic Church was at that time in England? But we'll come back to this a bit. All right? See you a bit. Welcome back to the Journey Home. Our guest tonight is Trevor Lipscomb, and I've kind of interrupted you in the middle, just when you're at that stage of examining the Catholic faith. And what I was wondering is that you kind of picked up, of course, you had a couple earlier encounters with Hopkins, and during that time, as you're now studying the Catholic faith, were you being introduced into some of the great English Catholic writers like Newman and others?
Not really. When I was recovering from the broken neck, I read Dombey and Son and Les Miserables and War and Peace, probably because I was not going through a happy time in life. And I realized I needed to change, and so I started reading actually some Evelyn Waugh.
Yeah.
So I've seen the TV version of Brideshead Revisited. I then read Brideshead Revisited, actually saw the TV version again after conversion, which makes for some interesting differences. And so Evelyn Waugh obviously is very Catholic. Unfortunately for me, he's very funny. So if you can imagine being in a neck brace and you're reading and you're laughing, it's actually excruciatingly painful. But one book that really struck me of his that's not well known is the biography of St. Edmund Campion,
oh, yes.
Which I read during the conversion process. or the instruction process, and you get a sense of outrage almost, that here you have this incredibly intelligent man who is treated horribly because of his belief, and he's quite clear that he's not out to overthrow Queen Elizabeth or anything like that, but they're going to hunt him down and kill him anyway. And that really struck home with me. You have someone here who is willing to give up his life for what he believes. As I joke, I don't like putting up with a paper cut in the office, and yet here's my confirmation saint who's hanged, drawn and quartered for standing up for what he believes in. And the story is told, I don't know whether it's true, that on the scaffold he's still offered a bishopric in the Church of England if he will convert. Those stories are always...
Something else that also fascinates me about British converts versus American is, in America, you take any corner in any city and you're going to have a Catholic church, maybe a Methodist church, and a Presbyterian and a Lutheran church. Mm-hmm. In America, none of those churches are any older than the others. Mm-hmm. That building might be 100 years old, but we're all about the same. Where you were was within driving distance of Lyford Grange, where Campion was tradered and turned in. I mean, you're living right within walking distance of Newman's. Did that affect you as a part of your journey at that point in time?
It did. I mean, he's paraded through the streets of Oxford with the sign with Campion, the seditious Jesuit, and it's really a warning for anyone else who's going to follow in his footsteps. The Catholic chaplaincy at Oxford is the St. Thomas More Chapel, to remind us of another Oxford graduate. And can I say we have more Oxford saints than Cambridge has saints? But you realise...
Cambridge had John Fisher.
2-1. 2-1. So you're aware of this living history. You can go down into London, and there's the St. James's Church there, where the Anglican spies were outside. It was for the embassy officials from other countries who were Catholic, and they were trying to spot are there any local homegrown Catholics going to Mass there. So there's a lot of history there. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I was even thinking, you as a publisher, I mean, you're not far from Bishop Challoner and all his work.
That's right, Richard Challoner.
Yeah, I mean, good stuff. We in America always want to get people to go over there and look at this great history of the recusant history, the Catholics fighting and reserving and not giving in, as you said, Campion. Right. That must have been an influence then on you during all this exploratory time.
Absolutely. And I read some Graham Greene novels as well. And again, some people have issues with Graham Greene, but again, if you're coming from a Marxist perspective, then reading some of Graham Greene's novels, such as The Power and the Glory, they're deeply human, and they're an easier way to bring you into the church. In terms of non-fiction, actually I read a magisterial book by Edward Norman, which is Roman Catholicism in England from the Elizabethan settlement until the Second Vatican Council. And I believe he's now converted also to the Catholic Church after being Anglican for many years, and he's part of the Anglican Ordinariate of Our Lady of Walsingham over in England. But that was an intriguing account. It's strange because you're becoming Catholic, and so you want to be part of this tradition, and Norman in his book tells you what the tradition is. Yeah. And there's a slightly different flavour to Catholicism in England than there is, say, over here, just because of the roots, and just because of the treatment that Catholics have had.
Well, even of Duffy's books on stripping of the altars, which is a powerful book, I think, in that it really shows the myth of this need for the Anglican renewal of the church, that the church was alive and well and very influential in the lives of common Englishmen all the way up into the Reformation. And that was a suppression of a church and not a renewal of a church. Right. So, family, friends encouraging you along this trip at this time?
Absolutely not. When I was finally received into the church, someone I was in grad school with turned around and said, "So I hear you become Catholic. I thought you were intelligent." He may be right, but it's got nothing to do with my conversion. So that's still the kind of attitude that you sometimes get in England. Even to the extent that if someone is Catholic, sometimes you'll say, "Oh, he's Catholic," and you'll whisper it. It's just not polite to say it, out loud in society. My mum and dad were not best pleased. My dad said, "I'll never set foot in a Catholic church," and my mum was pretty hostile, but they love me. They're fine in the end. And I got to do the sarcastic post-teenage thing where my dad's phrase growing up was, "We bring you up to have a mind of your own." So I got to say, "Well, I have a mind of my own, and now I'm using it. And how about that?"
Often the journey into the church for evangelicals particularly is dealing with specific doctrines, purgatory, confession to priests, fallibility of the Pope, Mary. You didn't hold to those any issues before anyway. But
No.
what about those? I mean, was it the church first and then dealing with the doctrines, or was it at the same time?
Well, the way I went through the process at Oxford, the Catholic chaplain would give talks on a weekly basis to anyone who wished to listen. And the idea was that if we were Oxford undergraduates or graduate students, we shouldn't be giving the same answers that a 14-year-old who's completed CCD has given. So there's a lot more intellectual heft in what he's saying. And then there were mop-up operations. Every week you'd have an hour with him to ask questions. And I figured I'd be going along until I got a problem with one of the doctrines, and that moment never really hit. It all seemed fairly logical to me. I think one of the things that really influenced me was, doesn't everybody, John chapter 6, right? Unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you should not have life within you. And it seems quite clear from context there, we're talking about transubstantiation. The Anglican Church has the 39 Articles, which says it's a Romish or Popish practice to believe that it's the body and blood of Christ. I think I'll side with John on that one. So transubstantiation was not really an issue, and in fact, it seemed to me it was more confirming of where I was headed.
When I visited England the first time, I remember standing in front of the Canterbury Cathedral, and at the first glance I thought there's something strange about this building. I was already Catholic. And then it struck me, there's empty places all over the place that were intended for statues, intended for Catholic worship. And almost a sense that to make sense of the beautiful architecture around you, you've got to believe John 6, or that architecture doesn't make sense. I mean, was that your own experience?
I would say yes. It was, but that stage I was really well on the road to Rome, I think. The only downside, my Oxford College has its own chapel. The college was built in 1458. There are carved saints on the altar. And as you go in, there's a painting of Our Lady with candles beside it, and that's the Anglican chapel. I think the first time I walked into Mass at the Catholic chaplaincy, it's a bare room. There's a painting of Thomas More over there. There's the tabernacle there, and it was a guitar Mass. Okay, all right.
Yeah, all right.
So that was.
Sadly, we're seeing that. There's a seminary I visited when I was over in Ireland. I got to be careful because I don't want to offend anybody here, but they had the beautiful, old, ornate, just beautiful sanctuary that was now never used for the modern. And when we did some taping there for Journey Home, we were able to set up all of our equipment inside this beautiful church and leave it there for 3 or 4 days because nobody's using it. I mean, that's kind of what you experienced when you came into the church.
Well, it was interesting when I went back home to the parish where my parents were living, and I had to laugh. I'll tell the story, if I may. I go in there, and because I convert and then I head off to America, so I'm back from America. So I'm not from around there, and it's the kind of place where there are very few Catholics. So if you're showing up and they don't know who you are, you're new in town. So at the end of Mass, the lady in front of me says, "So are you visiting?" And I said, "Yes, I live in America, but my folks live just up the road." And she said, "I hear America has problems with liberals. We have problems with liberals in this parish too. You have 6 altar servers in white and red robes. There's so much incense everyone is coughing. There's an altar rail at which everyone kneels to receive communion." And it's puzzling, where's the liberal liturgy here? And the only thing I can think of is that there are some people who would receive on their hands rather than kneeling. And I think by English standards, at least in that parish, they're the dangerous liberals. But the local parish was a lovely liturgy every Sunday.
Well, as you found yourself into the church, you're running into different theologies, old and new. I mean, was that part of your own journey, was sifting through some of those issues?
It was a little bit. After I came to America, I think my ties with Marxism were cut the first paycheck I got. I remember actually quite clearly I got the paycheck and the taxes are taken out of it, and I see on TV that Mayor Dinkins has his show in New York at that time, had his chauffeur taking him to some plush party, and I'm thinking, can't he take the metro? I mean, really the subway? And so that, I think, that's a joke, but I think by then I'm really over the left-wing aspects of things, and I'm more looking at church history and doctrine. But I did read a couple of books by John Sobrino and by Gustavo Gutierrez while I was over here. Right.
But one other book, we got a couple emails. Before I get those, I want to ask you, because I know you're connected to Newman's Loss and Gain.
That's right, yes. It was a book that I was walking through Oxford one day, ducked into the Oxford University Press bookstore and saw Newman's Loss and Gain. Who knew he wrote a novel? I didn't. So I bought it, read it, pretended I understood it, and gave a copy to the copy to my good friend who read it likewise. And a few years ago I was sitting there thinking, no, it's a great book, and I think it really ought to be made available again, but it's Victorian English, it's got a lot of Oxford slang. Newman is no slouch, he's got a lot of Latin in there, untranslated, you're expected to know it. So I thought it might be a good idea if someone wrote an introduction and someone translated the notes and someone explained the Oxford slang, and then I figured, well, maybe I should take a crack at that. So I wrote the introduction and tried to translate the Latin. If you read it, they are freewheeling Latin translations. And explain what's going on. And then I figured, well, to find a publisher for this, but who on earth is going to be interested in publishing this? And lo and behold, Joseph Pearce, who's the editor of the critical editions for Ignatius Press, who you've had on the show before,
yes,
was interested. And so with a few essays from those interested in Newman and Loss and Gain, the book was published earlier this year.
Yeah, most people don't realize that the first book that Newman wrote after becoming a Catholic was this semi-autobiographical.
Well, that's a tricky question to answer because he claims repeatedly that it's not autobiographical. He actually published it originally anonymously, and only afterwards that it comes out. And it gets an interesting critical reception. I mean, what had happened, when he was staying in Rome, he'd received a book published in England that was a novel written in the opposite way, that those who've just swum the Tiber and deeply regretted it, or some subtitle along those lines, talking about English converts. And one of the stories is that there's a chap dying at the end who's become a monk who deeply regrets that he had to give up all his intellect and will to join this oppressive organization. And so Newman essentially responded in the form of a novel. And it's a young chap who goes to Oxford and becomes a convert, just as Gerard Manley Hopkins and John Henry Newman, and I guess me too.
Exactly. Got an email from Mark from the Midwest. How has Trevor's relationship with Jesus Christ changed or deepened since his initial conversion?
Ooh, that's a tough one. It's deeper, whatever that means. I think it's more complex. It's amazing how once you can never read enough. Yeah. That just when you think that you've plumbed the depths of this particular piece of doctrine, you read another book, and guess what? You didn't understand it at all. So it's really coming to expand what you know.
Yeah.
And there's also the lived experience. My college roommate who urged me to stay within the Anglican Church, his father had an interesting study which said that one of the things about converts to Catholicism is that their conversion tends to be intellectual. So I was aware of that, and I thought, well, what can I do? What practical things can I do to manifest the faith that lies within me? And I started volunteering at a homeless shelter in Manhattan, where I often say, and that's where I met my wife, but she was volunteering as well. Trying to find opportunities to work for others. I even regard working at CUA as essentially a work of evangelization.
Right.
We're publishing books that hopefully their theology and philosophy will bring people into the church or help those within the church understand their faith more fully.
Well, it's a neat time to be head of a publishing company that's committed to the teachings of the church when the church is calling for a new evangelization. I mean, it's going to come through its writings that'll encourage people to get up off their seats and go out and tell people about the beauty of the church. Yeah.
Absolutely, and you go back to the fathers of the church, and the new evangelization is very much like the old evangelization. If you read some of the sermons and homilies of the church fathers, they pull no punches. And they're actually wonderful reading, apart from the fact they don't mince words, but they're also packed with quotations from scriptural passages elsewhere in the Bible. They're very keen on buttressing their arguments. And so if you have a particular feast day in the church and you want to read more about it, read what the church fathers have to say, because they're going to explore that in depth, and you'll come to understand and appreciate Jesus more.
Email from Anthony from Canada. A friend of mine is a college professor who seems to have an interest in Catholicism. What books might I get for him that could help his faith journey? So I guess the issue is an intellectual.
Mm-hmm. Again, that's a very good question that's difficult to answer. There are a number of books written at a fairly high level on the Catholic faith, and that might be a good place to start. The other thing is rather knowing the background of the person. So, for example, say, if I'm fairly left-wing, then reading liberal theology books help, or liberation theology books help bring me into the church. What is this academic interested in? If they're mostly interested, as I suspect many are, in the Catholic social teachings, then why not begin them with an understanding of Catholic social teaching, hoping that that will lead them to the Catholic moral theology as well?
That's you confirm what I always feel about when we get that question. It's a good question because you know the person sincerely wants a book, but it's so hard. Is it like fiction or nonfiction or biographies? It's tough. So it's really up to the individual. But as you said, what's the person a professor of? Mm-hmm. You know, where is his strength and weakness? And there's a book out there, because the beauty is we've got converts, of course, in every field. Yeah.
And I guess the obvious answer is the Bible.
There you go. The Catechism.
The Catechism.
There you go. Maggie from Ontario writes, Trevor, what would you tell someone who is on an honest search for truth and is frustrated by not knowing where to turn? How can we convince the person that the Catholic Church has the answers?
I thought I was going to get easy questions.
No.
I think that's very difficult. If the person is at a stage in their life when they can pray, prayer is going to be the answer to that. And from prayer, faith-seeking understanding, then one can go to books to explain more fully. And I think a lot of evangelization is done in quiet moments, person to person. It's an interesting question about whether you can read yourself into a faith. I'm not sure that you can. I think that the human touch, God works through humans. I
just read last night some quotes by Orestes Bronson, American intellectual. He was about as intellectual as you can get at that time and where he was dipping into. But in the end, he said, you're not going to read yourself into the faith. It's going to be grace.
That's right.
You know, it was a salvation of his soul that brought him in, not this intellectual, backflips that eventually convinced him. In the end, it was the salvation of his soul. So prayer.
Yeah, it's, I mean, and in fact, if you look at what we've been discussing about, we can talk about the books that I read and the places I've been. But in the end, I'm laying there on the bed, strapped up, and I hear, God exists, He's love, Jesus is His Son. Yeah. Without that, we wouldn't be here today, I don't think.
Right. Gerald from Grand Rapids writes, can Trevor give a short summary of Marxism and explain a bit about how it falls short from a Catholic point of view?
I think the executive summary is what's yours is mine and what's mine's my own, I think is the glib answer. There are the haves and the have-nots. It's based, as you said earlier on the class struggle. So it's the working class against the bourgeoisie, and the workers should control the means of production so that the proletariat should get more control over what's happening in terms of industry and the like. Marx famously said that religion is the opium of the people, and that's an interesting question too, what he meant by that, whether it's something that numbs them or whether it's something that helps them to survive through the horrors of the experiences of every day.
I mean, there are some that in their desire to live out Catholic social principles and then focus on the needs of the poor and maybe see how workers are not treated fairly by those that have the power, the money. Think of the Dorothea days and as such. I mean, they border very closely on Marxist ideas, it seems. I mean, what is it that keeps a good, faithful person who's interested in the poor, interested in fighting for the rights of the worker? What is it that keeps them from stepping over the line into Marxist ideas?
Actually, to quote the president of CUA, if I may, Christ will lead you to the poor. It's not necessarily true that the poor will lead you to Christ. So I think if you're working for the poor, if you're very concerned about the conditions of the poor, then keep that focus on Christ. If you're campaigning for the poor and you're not praying, if you're campaigning for the poor and you're not reading your Bible, I would add, if you're not saying your rosary, then you can lose the sense of purpose as to why you are doing this. Your concern for the poor is a matter of justice. You want them to receive what is their due because they are children of God. If you let that go, then you're working for the poor, as many other people do, and there's nothing distinctive about it.
Yeah, when you think of Mother Theresa, imagining ourselves being that intimate with these poorest of the poor. I mean, what enabled her to do that, besides grace, of course, was her seeing in that person Jesus. I mean, that's really where it's got to be. You got to keep seeing Jesus in the poor.
Yeah. I was up at Mother Teresa's place in the Bronx one Saturday, and we're chopping up food to provide dinners for the local homeless and poor, and we're waiting for food. And I turned around to one of the sisters and I said, "Well, where's the food coming from, sister? We don't actually have any food yet." She looked at me and said, "Providence." And so I say, "It's coming from Rhode Island?" She said, "No, Providence." And I'm sitting there thinking, well, hang on, we're feeding people in about half an hour. There's no food. And I just about finished that thought, and I'm wondering how to broach this with sister, as a huge truck pulls up. True story. A huge truck pulls up, and they said, "We just brought some stuff. Do you want it?" And that was lunch that day. Absolutely incredible.
We've got just a minute or so. Tell the folk about your work with Catholic University Press.
Well, we are the press of the Catholic University of America. We publish about 40 books a year, 35 to 40. In addition to the Fathers of the Church, we publish a goodly number of books on Catholic theology, Catholic philosophy, and the history of the Church. I'd like to publish some books about soccer, because I'm English, but we'll see whether that happens. And as I say, we're really looking to try and get books into the hands of people so that even if they can't read themselves into a conversion, they can come close, that prayer will do the rest, and that we can educate the faithful and let them know more about their faith. Yeah,
and to a certain extent, there is always the struggle when you're running a publisher to keep it in line with the teaching of the Church, maybe, but that's now that you're there in the seat, it's a good goal for you, right?
That's right. I mean, we're not going to be publishing anything that is contrary to what the Church teaches. There are other presses that do that, and I won't name them.
That's right. Well, you have the word Catholic in your title, so you're
That's right.
By that, to have that in your title is part of the mandate of being faithful to the Church. But thank you, Trevor, very much
pleasure.
for sharing with us on the program, and we also ask God's blessing on your work. Very important work with Catholic University Press.
Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Journey Home. It's good to have, lately we haven't had any new British converts, but it's good to have you join us on the program to give us your background. Thank you very much, and thank you for joining us. God bless you. See you again next week.